Good evening, everyone. Sorry, my bad state. We just had a conference in quantum mechanics. I will put it on the internet as soon as I reach Wi-Fi. Do enjoy. I think it was a very creative meeting, and I had at least 3 massive aha experiences, or really deep understanding of the algorithmic frequency plane, and that actually is just when you put light on the hologram that you get both space and time. Before that, there is no time and space in the way of thinking of a permanent space or time. It needs to be twisted maybe a little bit more. Yes. This was a very important understanding, and this is also combinable with fractal theory. And that is the very obvious that fractal theory shows that human experience does not have only one level, but it has several levels. And we need to get to all of the fractal levels, at least as many as we can. Because the more we reach, the more we understand. And these are the two hermeneutical horizons meeting each other, and it's in the difference the read-off is, not in the sameness. And this, as we discussed today during this rather massive sitting, is what we're after, not sameness. And I say Western language is completely infused with sameness. And the idea of representational thinking is today most expounded. It's a difficult subject to address, to say the least, because it doesn't lend itself easy to description. What is it about? But I will try to pinpoint a few features that could help you on the way to understand, well, at least find the tail of the fractal theory. As the cat showed you, the cat has a tail. If at least you can find the tail of the cat, maybe you can do the rest of the work yourself. Of course, I will continue to try to help as much as I can for my lectures. It is a tough thing to find out, and it took me a long time as well. So be prepared for that, and please, patience. Here patience is very valuable. Impatience won't serve you, won't help you, because it is taking you and your personality into perspective. The observer is in the world, and the observer being in the world means that we actually need to acquiesce to what the observer is. The subjective becomes more important in this case, and it becomes as important as the object. And think it this way: object plus subject equals reality. That means no matter what you think, no matter what your bias is, no matter what your inclination is, I'm sorry, subject has to come in whether you want it or not. That's something you need to understand. And as earlier I mentioned Garizuka, the author of the Dancing Wu Li Masters, he never understood that. What he did instead, he wanted it to be that way, and that will not serve the purpose. That has the opposite effect. Because what I'm pointing to, it's an understanding, and wanting something to be in a way is, sorry, it's not understanding. It might be good in some other circumstances, but it's still not understanding. Understanding is understanding. It doesn't have a purpose from the beginning. The subjective is the most complex, multi-level, and widest entity in the universe. Why? How could I say it's the most widest entity in the universe? Well, as fractality can be decomposed, so you can sort of take it out and it becomes like the Norwegian coast, bigger and bigger and bigger. And the subjective node inside the exogenous, is without limits. It has also an enormous amount of levels. And to reach into the depths of one's own soul, it's an absolute necessity for going further. No development can be made without becoming more sensitive and compassing to your inner side. And we need to constantly bring in new areas of knowledge into our zone, the endogenous zone, and how we can learn to get better and better to meet that radical other that we find within ourselves. These are, of course, the two hermeneutical horizons meeting. Without a careful take on the hermeneutical horizon, it needs to be constructed in a careful, decisive and complex way. Understanding will be very scarce and almost negligible. Still will be some, but it will be very scarce. And to keep to only one level of understanding is commonly called representational thinking. And I can try to show it this way. Here we have one person, we can call him Anders, this is Busse. They both have what they think is representational thinking. And I would say one major standpoint in representational thinking is that these persons think that other persons somehow are sharing their representation. And I would say that to be the illusion of sharedness. And that's one of the reasons we keep to that. Remember this, language games get constructed very easily and very quickly. And that could be actually a language game that's called the representational language game. And that purpose of that language game is just to sort of prove that we have the concepts in common. But it doesn't prove that the concepts are actually in common. So when we communicate, we miss out that the concepts are not in common. That is because Anders and Busse will directly react to the other person and they will continue to have a language game. But that is not the case that they share the concepts. It cannot be the case because all, so to speak, what quantum mechanics was about, essentially, its main core, its motivation and reason for having quantum mechanics was it was not shared before. Time and space were not shared before. That was the main problem. And that is proven from quantum mechanics. The main problem, the concepts were not of shared quality. Not at all. And that's proven. So your ideas of time and space and all the other concepts you have are not shared. Actually, proven by Wittgenstein and quantum mechanics and chaos theory, you can't even understand what you're thinking. Cannot understand what you're thinking. Because these concepts won't make any sense. They only do make some sense as a derived character. This is why I repeated what Stefan Mangold said earlier, that until you put the light into the hologram, you don't have time and space. It's a secondary feature to some extent, especially if you go from classical physics into quantum mechanics. It will be a secondary feature. That could be good to remember, because otherwise you won't be able to access time and space. But the lack of sharedness is the only reason for quantum mechanics project. The idea of quantum mechanics is just that. We have become in the representational thinking accustomed and I would say even dependent on, instead of thinking, to make guesses. This is the second take on representational thinking. What you do, as proven by Lakoff Johnson, David Bradle, but also Micah Smith, who show that Our thinking, as we call it, is just guessing, and then we put an explanation after we guessed. And this has been shown in the different tests of decision. We make the decision first, then we make up the reasoning for it. Because the left hemisphere, which we are all in, cannot make decisions, not complex decisions, not wholesome, holistic decisions, and therefore it needs to make guesses, but what it can do is to have mechanical rules for making up explanations for your decisions after the fact. And this is of course proven in the Libet experiment. We know as a fact all decisions that Westerners do are not based on thinking. The thinking comes afterwards. It's the left hemisphere that makes an explanation, and most people actually call that rationality or planning, where the decision is already made. Until we have access to the right hemisphere, we cannot think, and we cannot have a perception of what it is to think. Nothing at all. So if you have an idea that you're thinking, that's an illusion, and you need to start there where the facts are. If you don't do that, you will be ending up in shutting the cave even more. A little bit like those ants that take a larvae, brings it to a hole, put their eggs inside the larvae and then shuts the little cave. You will be like that ant who will die of starvation inside the hole. This is shutting off all access to the external world. And this very process of you making yourself right, that's the shutting mechanism. Sameness kills all everything. In sameness there can be no life, there can be no vividness, there can be no planning, can be no thinking. Sameness means eternal repetition. This is Sisyphus. There can be no intention, meaning, space and time. Everything is complete sameness. And you will always prove yourself to be completely right in your one level representational thinking. And I'm pointing of course to myself as well. We all share that, because how our language base is constructed and its, so to speak, pointing device of representationalism. It is a lure, representationalism, but don't be worried. You are in good company. Your ideas have been shared by all of philosophy, all of thinking tradition, and it's actually when you attack representational thinking or deconstruct, because you can't really attack it, that will cause fear in the ones who are sort of stuck in the cave. And I would say this is the reason why there have been so many texts on Derrida, Foucault and other deconstructionists from the world-famed Jordan Peterson. I do like this very smart professor, very sharp, but he sees the deconstructive forces as the Antichrist. And he sees them as the dissolver of understanding. And this is the gut reaction of representationalism. Once you take away the shadowy illusion. I don't like the word illusion because it's a bit more than that to representationalism. It is a sort of a very narrow understanding where your standpoint or your departure point, departure point is the best, is very narrow, not very developed. In Ian McKilcre's words, it will be similar to not having a developed right hemisphere, and thereby not being capable of thinking. The good news is that you can develop thinking. We can all do that. I've been speaking before about neuroplasticity, and that could actually be done even if you have a brain damaged. But in this case, there's not even a brain damage. The right hemisphere is still there, and it could be put into action once more. This is absolutely possible, but you need to put your ego away for a while and understand that you're not thinking now. You can't use your very precious instrument of rationality here, because true rationality you never felt. And this has always already been the case. You were born into this. So you cannot have a feeling for the thing you never experienced. And that's not a bad thing, that's an absolutely positive thing. That means that all you have is what you don't want now. It will sort of give some indication what you're looking for. It's not what you have now. And don't try to understand what we are getting at with the tools you presently have at hand. I think a lot about multi-level and multi-layered as the diamond of Julian Barber, or why not the hologram, or the fractality from chaos theory. There are many wondrous examples of fractality from YouTube, for instance. I see if I can link one. I usually promise that and nothing happens in the end. But on YouTube you can see how zooming in, opening up for iterations, this sort of at first felt sense of scalelessness, this sense of scalelessness will actually be changed into a truer understanding of scale, in pretty much the same way as when we go from monosemic thinking, that is just one level and it's also one point only, there will be a sense of loss of meaning at one, in the transference, going from one place to the other. But then, once you understand this idea of fractality, that there is a depth to a word, and many other meanings of the word are actually what we normally from this one plane area feel to be contradictory. And then all of a sudden on the second level you really understand that are not contradictory in any way at all. They are actually helping each other. Just in the same way as the exogenous reading going inwards and outwards is something that makes a read-off, and difference is the product, so to speak, not sameness. So representationalism is very close to sameness idea, or sameness doing, because it is actually sort of doing. And the doing you do is to compare two things and then you say they are the same and you give them the stamp of sameness. And there you go. This is how you build up representationalism. And you compare, if you recognize the word and the concept somewhere out in the debate or in literature, in a discourse, in a discussion, you say that is the same. And then you start the language game of sameness. It is self-producing, it's a chaotic system, but look at the why of it. The why of it is not what you think. The why of it is to have a conversation, a discourse. It doesn't prove sameness. Sameness is not there. It's a superficial game. And of course, this is one of the hardest things to get over because it's so massive today. You have so much sort of supporting the idea of sameness everywhere. And the more you get into, the more sameness you get, and the more support for sameness you get all over you look. And if you put the sameness glasses on your face, all you will see is sameness. And the byproduct anti-sameness. That's sort of a derived difference. But if you instead start out with difference, then you will have both true difference and true sameness. And that sameness will not be this shortcut, one level sameness. It will be much more complex because sameness is incredibly complex. And I mentioned that research made by Chang and Yang shows that sameness is so complex, takes so much time to learn, and to execute sameness takes a lot of material in the background, retention. And you need to start this phase space, and you have a sort of a normal phase. Now I'm talking about how face recognition works, and the normal phase needs to have an anti-phase, which is the anormal phase, atypical phase. And that's a huge complexity, but whereas you said, I see sameness, it's just nonsense. That's a superficial, shallow take on sameness, and it doesn't have the depth, and thereby it doesn't have the force. So it's not so much it's wrong, it's weak. It's like not having the energy to do the job of sameness, and then you just say sameness. Maybe it's a sort of language game you play with other people, and you want them, or you both, or all of you want to sort of confirm sameness, and you construct this game of sameness. This is the same as that. I was talking about that. It's the same thing. Those are the same concepts. And then you make up possibly a cause and effect scenario, and then you say that possibly the pollution in Gothenburg is because it's too much traffic. Let's have this toll, which they enforced like 7 or 6 years ago. Now there's a tax when you are entering into Gothenburg, and then the municipality in Gothenburg said, we enforce this limitations of traffic in Gothenburg, and therefore we can see a cause. The cause is lowering the traffic, and we have an effect, less exhaust and less pollution. And when research was made, that research proved that to be wrong, and then the research was wrong. Cause and effect is nothing simple. It's never as simple as that. Cause and effect is always as complicated as the situation. There's no easy solution here. And you might say, of course, putting taxes on cars won't cause less pollution. It has to be proven somewhere. It's not a true connection. Well, at some simplified level it is, for some people it is, because they don't have a deeper understanding of reality. And that is a subjective take. To say they don't believe that, or they don't have that understanding, would be in itself wrong. I think this is maybe a rather good pointer to what is complex understanding. Complex understanding is to understand that some from a lower level have that understanding, and that would be the truth, because then you have both subject and object. Subject and object together makes an endogenous hermeneutical horizon meet an exogenous and exogenous horizon, and in the read-off you have a result, and that is what it is. Can't say it's wrong, because then you will in some way infer representationalism, and that there is a sort of a rule govern otherworldly place where there is a rule say those people are wrong, they don't have that experience. That is nonsense in a way. If you really think careful about that, we can't say that. You will make the same fault as somebody I heard working in a big institution. She sent away emails and she complained to me. So angry with these people I send emails to. They misunderstand. I said, do you think it's their fault? Yes, it is. They misunderstood, it's their fault. And she implied some sort of absolute rule of understanding. I would say if somebody don't understand, they don't understand. There's nothing to add there. There's no outer world where you can extract rules for understanding. And if they don't understand, it's actually her responsibility to write emails that make sense, even to everyone. Can't blame them for not understanding. It's sheer nonsense. And that to be done by a professor, I think that shows the level of academia today. It's your fault you don't understand. You should have understood. You should have gone outside yourself and talked to the panopticon of understanding. I don't know why people are getting criticized who believes in fairies and all that, when these people do exist, believes in things that are even weirder. Oh, I don't know. Anyone can say, how could you be so ignorant not to understand my email? Only a subject that is deep enough can reach into objective reality and shared experience. This is not a free gift. Reality doesn't give you this gift, this lottery ticket of full understanding from other people. And having concept in commune, shared concept, that takes effort. The price or the reward is communal understanding, but it's not ever given for free. And if you don't put a lot of effort into your understanding, and if you don't go into yourself, you don't even have contact with your feelings, you will never ever reach out to externity. That will never happen. To cite Heisenberg, a person who doesn't know himself can never ever be understood by others, and he would never be able to make himself understood. Quantum mechanics has shown the subject should enter the equation. That means that all of you, all what is you as a person, has to come into the equation. All your memories, all your wants, and that doesn't make anything less. It is the very complexity that is needed for a true read-off. Otherwise, it won't be deep enough. So don't fall for the trick of representationalism. You think you're doing a service to humanity by taking something out of yourself. No, you're not. You are making a disservice to humanity and yourself at the same time. And you can have an understanding that reaches out. Otherwise, you will be a person who can only talk to yourself. And that talking won't make any sense, not even to you. Once again, private language argument that goes into thinking more than anything else. Doesn't reach out so much into communal language as your thinking. And the major problem is you don't make yourself understood by yourself. That is a goal to be reached, and that takes a lot of work. Before that work is put into the project, you won't even understand yourself. And this, of course, is what Julian Barber said. When he said we need to have a physics that is based on observables, he meant that the concepts in classical physics are not shared by anyone. They are subjective emotional pointers. And maybe they are sort of participating in a very shallow language game. And one of the results is to use the word understanding in that language game. But doesn't imply any real understanding at all. So do make a difference here. Here you should make a division. Just as I said in last lecture, do make a division between dorsal and ventral, because that is in reality. Do make a difference between true difference, and that difference should be in between true sameness and the want for sameness, and participating in a language game that is shallow, not deep enough, you not being deep enough to understand it shallow, and you are participating in a nonsensical game that gives byproduct the word sameness or understanding, but it doesn't give true understanding. Another pointer to that is we all want understanding, and of course we are going to construct language game that gives us, we think, from our narrow perspective, my wanting to have understanding should be enough. Therefore I sort of construct it. But it's going to be completely filled with sameness, repetition and boredom. It will bore you out, won't give you any energy, and you won't reach out to an objective, real, shared reality. That takes a lot of effort. It is the Beetle box. Newtonian classical physics is the Beetle box. And two of the concepts there are the Beetle box. It's time and space and scale, but free. McGilchrist has shown that schizophrenia and autism are occurrences of the modern day and age. Both these afflictions are not older than a couple of centuries. The inability to understand reality it's what makes for autism. He won't be understood by others, neither do he or she understand his own inner working. One could say, a bit exaggerated, that the autistic one is one who's constantly tries to make the world one level and monosemic, to have only one meaning. But what does it mean for a word to have only one meaning? It doesn't have any meaning, it doesn't mean anything. But only when you don't understand enough, you could think it has a meaning. And that's on the one level plane. What he will do is to make himself subjective and unaware. He will be put a sort of bit of blackness or darkness, and that will be the unawareness. A little bit like a drunk. I heard a story the other day. He was this student at the University of Indiana. I don't remember the place. But he went to a party. It's some classmates, sleeping room, dormitory. And then they left later on after loads of drinks. And they went to another party, and then he realized he forgot his jacket. He wanted to go back to the place to ring the doorbell and try to call people. He never got in. And then he disappeared. Nobody ever heard from him again. It turned out like half a year later that he didn't disappear. They found him somewhere in a very odd place. He tried to get into the house, but because his understanding was limited compared to like one level understanding, monosemic understanding, he felt that any way to get into the house would be okay, once he wasn't let into the house. And he had the bad luck of finding into the transformation station. Transformation station could actually be situated inside a house in the United States, not in Sweden. And he managed to get in there, despite many warnings and coverings, and it was actually situated on a low level. He went into the transformation station, and in the complete darkness, he tried to get to the dormitory again. And he somehow managed to get his finger inside the transformator and was immediately electrocuted. And this is like being monosemic. It's like the real drunken state. You don't have any information coming out from you, and therefore there's no information coming in. And you are lowering your awareness. And you think in this state you need, maybe you reach presence or something, and you think it's a happy state. I think what the alcohol does, take away the awareness, there it for an instant takes away this too tough urge for presence that you really want to be living again. And that is a pain in the end. Alcohol for a short while takes it away. But it's also a good metaphor what this lack of awareness is on the lower level. It's like being in the dark, you don't see, and you have to feel yourself with the fingers. And especially if you're not accustomed to that. And I can tell from my own perspective, actually, only like 4 or 5 months, I think it was in Vårgårda, I had no idea where I was when I wake up. It was a scary feeling. It was shaking, it was scary. It was, I don't know where I am. The system needs to know where it is, and a good start is actually just in this example to work in the darkness, because then you will realize how little you know of the space around you. Having the eyes habitually put on looking for objects sort of make you constantly occupied by looking, and in this occupied process you get the feeling you're actually localized. And with alcohol it's the same thing. Take away the awareness of not being unaware, take away the awareness of the lack. It doesn't take away the lack though. It takes away awareness. It should actually do the whole thing worse. The world is, and I think this is a very interesting conclusion, and this has been something that's been almost a clear case. And when we speak about very advanced mathematics, we've been thinking it's been going on in the left hemisphere. Now it's clearly shown, especially in the latest book, The Matter with Things, that all those people in high mathematics are actually, despite what they all think, some of them, they're actually using the right hemisphere. Otherwise it wouldn't be holistic, it wouldn't be creative, and it couldn't do the most advanced things. And this shows that although we have this miss since the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman, which is indeed a beautiful picture, at times very funny, poor Rain can only do mechanical calculations. And the instance with the matchsticks is very true to the case. This is also the only thing you can do on a low level. You cannot reach to a higher understanding. As long as you are in the low level, you will sort of experience a classical physics world. There will be spots that are ununderstood or darkened out. And then there will be slightly brighter spots. What you can do from that point of view is to enlarge in the brighter spots, to let knowledge go into the darker spots, because it's only knowledge that can set you free. And I know knowledge being a misused word in modern educational system, but there is a true knowledge. Once you get into the multi-layered and wide knowledge, which I understood both from Rodolphe Gachet and Susie Frobel, you can have true understanding. And then you will understand that the commonly used word knowledge doesn't mean anything. It's just a nick word. It's a renaming process. There is true knowledge in the world, and that will actually completely surprise you as something absolutely delicious, fruitful, joyous, happy, interesting, and new. And just the experience of newness, it's something that gives you energy, because your whole life until now you've been occupied by repeating everything representationalism, sameness, and all you go, every book you read, every article you read, every YouTube clip you see, or whatever discourse you enter, you see sameness, and you immediately assume that everyone is talking about the same thing as you. But once you enter knowledge, you realize it's not the case. And that is not a bad thing. Once you realize, it would be a fantastic thing. Because then you're understanding that your level of understanding equals your world. And the world gets more complex as you get more complex. And you need to get down to your own past and all those things. That's not beside the point. And there's nothing horrible lurking around there. Memories don't have to be distasteful, as they always are in classical physics. We all try to shy away from memories by tensing, over collapsing, taking memories away, because we are sort of caught up in the idea of poverty-stricken reality, where existence is very scarce and it's actually defined from absence, thereby making existence utterly impoverished. An existence that don't give you pleasure, it doesn't give you materiality and all those things you wish for. It gives you like an open cloud. It's just, you can't touch it. True existence you can touch, and true existence is derived, a secondary category of true space. So if you have true space, you can reach it into existence and you can enjoy it to the fullness, because you are put on this earth to enjoy the visit to planet Earth. And I would say that is our birthright, to enjoy the world. And it is not something that will be taken away from us. it is still there. And it won't disappear. The neuroplasticity that Jim McIlkis was talking about, of course it applies to the right hemisphere. That could be opened up. And you can have holistic knowledge. So don't let the ego take over. Instead, open up. Think about this as you start over. And it's like starting, if you were to get a new hobby, for instance, knitting or something like that, you would know, you will accept yourself, I don't know knitting, I'll be listening carefully, look carefully and imitate carefully. Then you can learn, because there is an enormous amount of knowledge you haven't even touched yet. Traditions, different ways of doing things, proverbs, smart things that we all neglect in this sameness representational system. And one of the promises of the representational system is a complete illusion. And that is that you can use it to get something you want. You can't get anything with representational thinking. You can just chance, and then you can sort of say it was thanks to my planning or my rationality. That is counterproductive. Instead, develop thinking. And once you think, you will get much more, and then you don't have to do this cognitive dissonance and lure yourself into that it is true, it is going to be true. In a real sense, will give you true satisfaction and give you knowledge. And this is a little bit how people used to be able to tell bad picture from a good picture in the old days. They didn't have to have people that show that painting was real. It was real by being real. Nobody has to look at this is a falsification of Rembrandt or Vermeer or Tizian or somebody else. You looked at it, you enjoyed it. You saw all its complexity and then you bought it. Nobody would say, they didn't even sign their paintings. They were true. Yes, of course there was some inflation in prices when the painter was well known, but still, I would say 90% was the actual real experience of the original. And it was the complexity that shows the original. And we can teach that sense once more, because fractality can always be relearned. Fractality hasn't disappeared from the earth, although representationalism doesn't even understand it. But that doesn't mean it disappears from reality. This is not something that is rational in itself, no matter what representationalism think. And actually we can use representationalism to understand that other. You can go in to see its working and see that there are different chaotic systems in work, and they are working as good as other chaotic systems, but you can actually reach into more complexity. This is why I mention representationalism as a language game. It is still a sort of complexity. It is still doing its job. But look carefully to the why. The why is to end up with the concept, not to have the final real product. And whereas objects in the normal world of classical physics and everyday people are objects that are very shallow, non-permanent, you can have objects that have permanence and are really firm, really pure, real objects, not those shallow, made-up objects by representationalism, and where you can't even touch them or enjoy them. It's like a delicious drink you can't even drink, because you put the distance there. It's not only your fault, but partly you put the distance in there. Because you need to have closeness to have distance. Now what you're doing, you start out with distance. You do a forehand, and then you don't get either distance nor closeness. And the reason is the take is done beforehand, it's done before the fact, comes in the wrong sequence. Let reality come to you, then make your judgments, and then you can be prejudiced even. You can do whatever you want, but you need to wait experience to happen first. A little bit like before you open your eyes in the morning, just imagine what can be yours, something nice, and that will in itself go into your inner system, give you peace, but also some sort of expectation, a happiness, a sort of boiling happiness, not completely boiling, but a small bubble boiling. And that will inform your exogenous take from the endogenous, and then you will experience more, be more present, take in more. And then your experience will be more satisfactory, and you don't have to feel that stressed because you don't get satisfactory experience. This is, I would say, that's usually why we stress. Because you stand and you or sit and you say, I don't get any satisfaction. The time is running. I need to run and catch my satisfaction. It doesn't work most cases. Actually, when you rush for the satisfaction, it gets meager, it becomes more shallow. So, of course, you still get it, but to a lower degree. Whereas you wait, you will be that child who could wait for the marshmallow. And I didn't mention that in the test, but what the children received who waited for the marshmallow was also more pleasure. And I would say children who are too greedy at too young an age, they don't enjoy what they put in their mouth. You can ask me, I put anything in my mouth. It could be a beetle, it could be a piece of dirt, it doesn't matter. That us children. We grown-ups, we can learn to wait and make a very true wish for what we see, and then it becomes like stabilized, it gets substance, it gets stability, and this is the substance we lack in everyday life. We're living in this substanceless world with no objects, no existences, because we're too greedy to get the existences, and then we think we can just wish them, conjure them, and you think, oh, I can just wish them, and it's a bit, you don't get anything, you don't get any satisfaction. It is like looking at the menu and not getting the food. If you get the food, you could enjoy both the menu, and then you can enjoy the food even more. But as we do it, our objects are no longer real for us. We made them unreal. We made them to sort of subjective, solipsistic tokens for things we don't reach into. We don't reach into the objects because we demand the objects before they even sort of open themselves up. This is a little bit like the lichtung. When you cut the wood stone, you make fresh air and for things to appear in a nice, calm fashion. And it could be beautiful. Lichtung is beautiful. There's loads of green, loads of sunshine, and loads of air. And it's also even more helped by the difference from the woods. But it can actually show its absolute beauty in itself. It doesn't need to be compared. Whereas the existences we have in our head need a polarity to be perceived as rather good. And that polarity is what they are not. So they gain their force almost by a parasitic, cannibalistic tendency of defining something good in what is not good. And that's not the same thing as having true goodness, because that's goodness in itself, not only made up by polarity. And this is how we can reach into true truth, truth that is not the opposite of falsehood, which is a shallow take on it. And it also makes truth dependent on falsehoods. And I think we often do those mistakes. Fractality shows there is depth within every little grain. And that does not mean that we're going to get lost within the grain. Or I think some people who read William Blake, for instance, or also Mandelbrot thinks what he means is going to look like on a leaf and stay there forever looking at a little leaf. No, that's just the starting point. And then you still have some remnants of a scale that is not true to the fact. Well, I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant night, because it's night here, even though it's completely light. Let's zoom in on the poor old cat.
Good night. Thank you.